Welcome back to Game of Theories, where I introduce theories of management, administration, and leadership. This is episode 26. In this episode, I'll introduce fairness theory and its applications in our daily lives and professional lives. We've all experienced situations where we feel that we've been treated unfairly. And the fairness theory explains why we might hold someone accountable for the unfair treatment. It also explains why the same outcome is considered in some cases fair, but in other cases unfair. Fairness theory was introduced in 1998 and expanded upon in 2001. To explain people's perceived fairness, fairness theory focuses on how accountability judgments and counterfactual thinking influence fairness perception. Let's first look at accountability judgments. To achieve justice, accountability plays a vital role in determining who is to blame for an injustice. Without assigning responsibility, there can be no injustice. This is why the process of assigning accountability, or how we determine who is to blame for an injustice, is at the heart of justice. When we evaluate the fairness of someone's actions, we're essentially weighing the decision to hold that person accountable for their actions. I'm sure you've run into situations where you felt that someone was responsible for the negative outcome, but you couldn't quite put your finger on why. According to fairness theory, there are three components that must be present for someone to be held accountable for a negative outcome. First, there must be harm or negative consequences resulting from the situation. Second, the harm must be attributable to the discretionary action of another person. Third, there must be a violation of an applicable standard of behavior. These three components establish a sense of injustice that motivates people to seek accountability. Imagine that there is a state employee who serves as the head of a large government organization. This person has been receiving a salary of over $10 million every year, which is significantly higher than the average salary for government employees. It's worth noting that this salary is funded by taxpayers' money, as the organization is a public entity. The state employee has built a reputation as a champion of social justice, regularly giving speeches and participating in public events to advocate for workers' rights. However, due to budget cuts, the head of the organization decides to lay off several cleaning staff members who have been working in the building for years. The cleaning staff members are devastated because they rely on their jobs to support their families, and they have been dedicated to keeping the building clean and safe for everyone who works there. As news of the layoff spreads, the public begins to question the head of the organization's commitment to social justice. Many people feel that it is hypocritical for someone who claims to champion workers' rights, especially when the state employee's own salary is so high and funded by taxpayers. In this situation, the head of the organization may be seen as violating the three components of accountability. First, there is harm or negative consequences because the cleaning staff members have lost their jobs. Second, the harm is attributable to the discretionary action of the head of the organization who made the decision to lay off the cleaning staff members. Third, there is a violation of a moral standard because the head of the organization prioritized his own financial interests over the interests of the cleaning staff members. It also calls into question the social justice champion's commitment to advocating for workers' rights, as his action in this situation did not align with his public rhetoric. Counterfactual thinking is another key component of fairness theory. Before I introduce the definition of counterfactual thinking, let's imagine this scenario. Rachel is Adam's supervisor. Rachel publicly ridicules him. For example, during a meeting, Rachel says to Adam, I can't believe you came up with such a stupid idea. It's no wonder why you are always struggling to keep up with everyone else. Rachel also interrupts Adam repeatedly during a presentation to make sarcastic or critical remarks. If Adam perceives this ridicule as undeserved mistreatment resulting from an action over which Rachel had control, he holds her accountable for unfairness, blaming her for the mistreatment he received. This is where the concept of counterfactual processing comes in. Fairness theory conceptualizes Adam's reaction in terms of how he processes the situation. When Adam compares his actual situation to a fair treatment counterfactual, the discrepancy between the two can result in negative emotions such as anger, frustration, and anxiety. In the context of fairness theory, a counterfactual refers to a scenario that did not occur but is imagined as a point of comparison for the actual scenario. In simple terms, counterfactual thinking is contrary to the facts. To engage in counterfactual thinking, we imagine what might have happened differently if things had been slightly or significantly different in the past. In the case of workplace ridicule, Adam might imagine a counterfactual scenario where Rachel did not publicly ridicule him and instead gave him feedback privately. By comparing the actual scenario to this counterfactual scenario, Adam evaluates whether Rachel's behavior was unfair or not. Counterfactuals are important aspects of fairness theory because they allow us to make judgments about fairness by comparing the actual scenario to counterfactual scenarios. By imagining what could have been different, we evaluate whether someone had the ability to act differently and should be held accountable for their actions. Counterfactual thinking also helps us determine what actions could be taken to prevent unfair treatment in the future. The would, could, and should counterfactuals are three counterfactual questions critical for holding someone accountable for a negative outcome. In the context of unfair treatment, a would counterfactual means we imagine a scenario where we did not experience unfavorable conditions. This type of counterfactual can help to highlight the discrepancy between the actual situation and a more desirable one, which can contribute to feelings of being treated unfairly. Simply experiencing unfavorable condition is not enough to hold someone accountable for unfair treatment. Sometimes unfavorable conditions can arise from personal choices or genetic factors that are beyond anyone's control. For example, an employee named Bill has an eye condition that makes him slow in doing digital data entry work. That eye condition is primarily determined by genetics, and the digital data entry is not what Bill is hired to do. Despite providing a doctor's letter about his condition and necessary accommodations at work, Bill's supervisor assigned him a heavy load of data entry work. However, what makes the situation even more frustrating for Bill is that the data entry work can be done automatically, and the supervisor has asked people to do it manually as a show of power and authority. Bill did his best to complete the work, even though it was difficult and time consuming. However, during a team meeting, Bill's boss publicly berated him for being too slow, saying, You are holding the team back with your slow work. In this situation, most people hold the supervisor accountable for Bill's unfair treatment. While Bill's eye condition is not something he can control, he did inform his supervisor and try to find a way to make his work manageable. However, his supervisor still assigned him a heavy workload and publicly humiliated him for being slow, even though the data entry work could be done automatically. To hold someone accountable for unfair treatment, there needs to be evidence that someone had the ability to act differently and choose a different course of action that would not have resulted in the unfavorable conditions experienced. In the case of Bill, a wood counterfactual is that Bill compares his actual situation to a hypothetical scenario in which his supervisor would be more understanding. He may think about how he would have felt if his supervisor had instead shown understanding during the work assignment and meeting. By imagining a different scenario in which Bill would have felt better, he is able to recognize that the unfavorable conditions he experienced was preventable. Could counterfactuals mean that we perceive someone's actions could account for unfair treatment we experience? If Rachel ridicules Adam in public, he perceives that she had a choice about how to treat him, and that ridicule was only one of several possible actions. She could have chosen to convey feedback privately, but she did not. Therefore, Rachel has the potential to be perceived as a perpetrator because she had different options available that would not have led to Adam's unfavorable conditions. Should counterfactuals mean that we apply normative standards of right and wrong to evaluate different courses of action? Here, normative standards refer to commonly accepted rules, principles, or values that guide behavior and decision making. These normative standards are often based on moral, ethical, or legal considerations and are used to evaluate whether people's actions or behaviors are appropriate or acceptable. For example, in a workplace setting, normative standards might include treating coworkers with respect, refraining from discriminatory behavior, and adhering to organization's bylaws, policies, and procedures. Adam might find public ridicule to be unacceptable form of conduct for a supervisor, and he would consider it more appropriate for supervisors to give feedback privately. By applying this should counterfactual, Adam considers Rachel to be blameworthy. The combination of would, could, and should counterfactuals help us evaluate whether someone is accountable for unfair treatment and determine appropriate actions to take. Changing any of these three counterfactuals could change our perceptions of blame and perceived unfairness. Counterfactual thinking can help us evaluate situations of unfair treatment. Here are some recommended readings if you want to further explore fairness theory. Fairness theory is a theoretical model of justice that explains how we assign accountability, responsibility, and blame by examining how we evaluate the actions of others in terms of fairness or unfairness. It provides us with a valuable framework for understanding how people evaluate the fairness of their interactions and relationships in organizational settings. My question for you at the end of this episode is, how do you apply fairness theory to explain the three components of organizational justice: distributive justice, procedural justice, and interactional justice? If you want to refresh your memory of organizational justice, check out this video. In the next episode of Game of Theories, where I introduce theories of management, administration, and leadership, we'll be exploring another theory for understanding organizational behavior: equity theory. So make sure to tune in next time for more insights and ideas on how to lead and manage effectively in today's complex workplace.